Good morning, everyone. My name is Ernie Humphrey. I'm the Vice President of Educational Programs for Proformative, the online community for corporate accounting, treasury, and finance professionals. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar this morning, Budgeting and Forecasting Best Practices, Setting the Stage for Success in 2012. According to a number of recent studies, budgeting and planning are at or near the top of the list of concerns for many CFOs. The process takes too long, is not accurate enough, the tools available seem to make for more work, not less, and so on. What does the process need is a complete rethinking and re-execution to make it better, faster, more accurate, and accountable. You will learn about the best current practices in budgeting and planning and how to impact the people processing technology behind building a world-class budgeting and planning capability. This knowledge will be brought to you by experienced experts on the subject who deal with budgeting and planning for a living and clients much like you. And on that note, I would like to thank Host Analytics and Baker Tilly, companies whose commitments to thought leadership in making the budgeting and forecasting process easier and more meaningful for us all helped make this event possible this morning. A brief note on today's agenda. First, we will hear brief presentations from 3 speakers. Then we'll move to the panel discussion, where we will spend the remainder of our hour. We would like it to be an interactive experience for you, so if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get to all of them, but we will do our best and we'll follow up afterwards on any questions we will not get to. We will send out soft copies of the presentation to all attendees, and we are offering CPE credits for the CPA in the audience today. On the last slide, if you didn't check the CPE credit on the way in today, there will be an email address for Tanya Walsh, and you can send your CPE request to her. Okay, let's get started with introducing our first speaker, Carrie Brooke, Vice President of Marketing, Host Analytics. Carrie currently directs Host Analytics marketing activities. Previously, she managed the highly successful release and launch of Hyperion Planning, and subsequently ran product marketing for all of Hyperion's package applications. Most recently, she was with Oracle and led the product management team responsible for all Oracle ETM planning products. Prior to working in the high-tech industry, Carrie held positions in finance and IT for large organizations such as Ciba-Geigy and Unilever. Carrie is a chartered UK accountant. Carrie?
Thanks, Ernie, and welcome everyone to this webinar today. So as Ernie said, I'm going to be going through just some of the research that we've done with our customers on how they have actually moved to be more agile in their business practices by improving their budgeting and planning processes. So I'll be going through really the theory of better budgeting and planning, and then we'll pass over to the practitioners. So when we look at finance and their role in budgeting and planning, I really believe, especially since I was an accountant in Europe, that the role of finance has definitely changed. And for those who it hasn't changed, they're actually in that process now. And what do we mean by that evolution? Well, this is a very old-fashioned view of finance, right? It's a reactive one. It's the person behind the person, right? It's only being able to work with rigid data and really just reporting financial results. And what we want to move towards with better budgeting and planning is for finance to become a much more active, proactive business partner in the organization and be helping decision-making real-time and providing flexible information to all functional heads and really driving business results. And technology is an enabler of this. It's not the only enabler, of course, as we'll see, but it is an enabler. So there are a couple of things that we're hearing, really the issues that are getting in the way of better budgeting and planning, and a lot of them stem from the applications that are being currently used. So, and those in probably about 80% of customers that I speak to before implementing a performance management application is a spreadsheet system. So, this list is endless, but there's no version control, all the links are broken, And I'm sure all of you have spent many a long night trying to reconcile spreadsheets. The other thing is that a spreadsheet is not a finance application, and there's very little out-of-the-box support for those financial calculations. Even if things added up properly and it was a finance application, you then need to get actuals and budgets in the same system, and you need to get different reporting tools out to the organization. Some people just want data. Some people want ad hoc reports and to be able to slice and dice. Some people just want a dashboard on their desk every morning. Once we've got those actuals and budgets in the same system, how do I then model my what-if scenarios? How do I, at the coalface, if you like, at the operational end of the business, how do I allow my experts, my decision makers, my functional heads to really do their own scenario modeling, while still doing that with a view to what the top-down plan is? So each operational person needs to understand what the long-term or strategic direction of the organization is in order to make their functional decisions with those strategic and financial implications in mind. And we argue at Host Analytics that those first four are really, if you get those right, it's going to improve your process, right? It's going to save you time. It's going to make data more accurate. But if you resolve the top two issues, then that's where we've seen customers driving profitability. And in one case, truly, they actually saw $1 million worth of operating cash being freed up by better planning. So how have these issues been addressed over time? Well, if we look at the evolution of finance applications, that first generation of finance applications really helped with those first three issues, right? They were kind of these very domain-specific client-server applications that helped things add up better, had out-of-the-box support, and started to provide some, pretty nice dashboards and variance reports. And then in 2000, we began to see a proliferation of web-based applications built off of more robust back-end databases. So relational databases being used in products like OutlookSoft, Essbase being used in products like Hyperion Planning, and we saw more scenario modeling taking place. But I would argue that the cloud or software as a service technology is really this third generation of applications that is finally beginning to help more people in the organization have access to these finance applications and really start to drive profit improvements as well as performance improvements. So, what is budgeting and planning today then? We've been through a lot of these with the business issues, but when it comes down to it, I see a severe lack of accountability for both, not just the results of the budget process, but the results of the company as well, for the results of a particular business unit. So in a lot of this, as I said, this technology is an enabler, right? So I see a lot of budget managers and a lot of finance managers thinking, as Ernie mentioned at the beginning, about people, process, and technology. But very often those are seen in isolation, right? So we think about controlling the people aspect through good hiring and supervision. We think about business processes. Gosh, who hasn't been through some kind of $1 million business process reengineering project at some point in their careers? And then technology is still very often we think, well, that's part of IT, and that's really not the purview of the business manager, and in this case, the financial head. However, what we're seeing with our customers and with finance people who are really taking a leadership role in their organization and really taking a seat at their decision-making table is those finance people are those that are looking at how all of these three things are linked. So what are the steps of linking those people, processes, and technology, and what are the steps that we've seen companies take? Our advice, our advice would be to really look at these 9 steps to become more agile. So the first is a pretty pretty simple one, right? So systemize the process. It's not, look at things as a whole. Look at them as an entire process. What people are involved? What technology do you need? And believe me, it's not Excel, right? You need to get rid of all of those mechanical difficulties before you can start doing some of these more value-added steps. Step 2 is once you've got a robust system in place, the world does not end on December the 31st. And, I think we've all been guilty of trying to manage to the plan to the end of the financial period. The most successful companies that we've seen implementing any finance applications in the budgeting and planning world are those which take a longer-term view of their business and, more importantly, implement some kind of rolling forecast, right? Whether that's only 12 months in advance, very often I see sort of an 18-month rolling period. And in order to do that, you constantly need to update your actuals, which means integrating to your ERP system, and more importantly, automating that integration. Step 3 is around growing and transforming the business. So, when we think of managing the business and then doing something differently, the way that we look at it is through initiatives planning. So basically what this is look at your business as is, right? Look at, this is how much we would grow if we did the same products in the same market to the same people. Then what our most successful finance folks do is take a look at, okay, so I've got these 5 additional projects that I can do. How does those affect my ongoing plan, and which initiative is going to be more successful based on a blue sky project? And in this way, if you think about planning in terms of business as is and then initiatives, it means very often you can take advantages of opportunities in your market as they before they arise, rather than be reactive to them. The 4th step is then around strategy, right? So, be able to make top-down strategic decisions. Be able to really understand, as a finance person, what the operational drivers are of the business are, and then also be able to make adjustments at any level in the organization, which is what we mean by middle-out planning. So you need to be able to create those high-level drivers, not just from your internal financial and operational data, but also using external benchmarks and external macro and microeconomic indicators. Step 5 is bringing all this together in a format that people want to see. As finance folks, if you're anything like me, I'm a bit of a data hound, right? So I like to see all of my marketing statistics in a big old table of data, and then I actually do my own ad hoc reports. But very often, we need to provide those dashboards and scorecards so people understand how their metrics are really driving the success of other pieces of the organization. And that's how collaboration and scorecard intelligence can really bring those 2 things in. Operational data, I touched on this previously as well. Never forget the operational drivers. It's very easy to sort of get focused on, well, I need to produce a P&L, a balance sheet, and a cash flow. Always understand what the leading indicators are of your business, and very often those will be the operational data pieces of your plan, not just the financial pieces of your plan. Number 7 is related to that, is KPIs, right? And this does not have to be a 6-month management consulting project. Get outside help on this, absolutely. But look at what, ask your operational guys, what is driving your piece of the business? look at what your growth opportunities are for next year and really try and understand both from an organic and external perspective how you're going to meet those growth targets, and then plan your KPIs around that. And then step 8, link those long-range plans, not just the short-term budgets into dashboards, but make sure that you're linking your long-range plans into your scorecard. So create those strategy maps, right? Understand how all the pieces of the business fit together. And in fact, what some people have done is actually implement a balanced scorecard methodology that really encapsulates that long-term plan and makes it measurable for every employee. And then finally, probably the most important is scenario modeling. And when we talk about scenario modeling and what-if analysis, this is not just the top-down finance-driven plan. We want everybody in the organization, business leaders, to be doing their own what-if scenarios. And that needs to be integrated into the main planning process. Very often what we see is the lack of agility comes from, well, we have these top-down plans that come from finance, but then all the business leaders go off and create their own spreadsheets. If you have an integrated but user-owned, expert-owned scenario modeling process, you'll automatically get that business agility in your companies. So I wanted to catch up on some time, so I know I went through that very quickly, but I'm going to hand back over to Ernie now, and he'll be taking you through some poll questions. Thank you, Ernie.
Oh, thank you very much, Carrie. I very much appreciate that great content. So what we're going to do at this point is, in order to comply with our requirements for CPE, we're going to do a quick polling question while I go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Joe Ritchie, Director, Consulting Group, Baker Tilly Virchow Krauss. Joe has been with the firm since 2009. His career spans the last 30 years. He started in private industry with 3 publicly traded companies in financial and operational managerial positions. The remaining half of his career has been consumed working with global management consulting firms where he managed teams to solve enterprise organizational challenges through process and technology-oriented solutions. He has experience managing projects for clients with revenues ranging from $50 million to $13 billion, with closely held family businesses to global market-leading companies, with sites ranging from a few domestic locations to programs encompassing all continents. So now I'll just go ahead and close that poll. And what I'll do is I will hand that presentation over to Joe. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Ernie, and welcome everyone. Let me just jump right in and really say I think today's discussion objective really never falls out of fashion. I think we're all experiencing the worst economy we have ever lived through, and I think it's providing us more credence to the budgeting and planning process to be more top of mind. And I read frequently, and there's a couple of surveys I want to bring to attention. There was a CFO magazine survey in the May of 2011 issue in an article called Let It Roll. And in that survey, it talked about CFOs, 84%, they're really concerned about the annual budgeting process and the efficiency and effectiveness of the overall process. And then the next major concern for them went right into forecasting, about the cycle time. How long is it taking? How accurate is it? And I know Kerry touched upon a couple of those points. And then just to get some more proof out in the marketplace working with other companies, there was another survey from Accenture, and they covered 273 companies in their survey, and what they were aiming to learn was the satisfaction level of those companies with their annual planning capabilities. Now here's some shocking numbers. 11% of those 273 companies were completely satisfied with the planning capabilities of their company. Now, 2 years ago, that number was 17%, so it's going in the wrong direction. And just as another, foundational line here, 10 years ago, 20% of those companies really felt great about their planning capabilities. So I think, the topic is right in time for the, the annual budgeting process. Some of you might already be in that process. We hope that what we're going to convey to you today will help you give information to bring back to others in your organization. So let me get started and go through our agenda. What I'd like to cover is our corporate performance management model, really an operating process model, and then share some of the best practice attributes that we are seeing with our clients and convey what are the benefits of those attributes. And what should you expect? What are those outcomes? How can you recognize whether or not you're achieving a best practice? And then I'd like to close with some food for thought and leave you with 3 questions to ask yourself to go back to your company and self-assess yourself. So let's move on. Okay, here we go. So let this corporate performance management model transition all the way through. So there are really 4 pillars I'd like to touch upon. If you see those blue boxes there, really it always begins with a vision and strategy for your company. I'm sure there's a guidance memo or instructions that go out to say, here's who we are, here's who we want to be, here's what we need to do to get there. And now you're into the modeling aspect, right? A group of people in your company so that they can then achieve the goals and objectives for that annual budgeting cycle. So key to that now is really synchronizing that information flow. Because when you go down to execution, I want you to think about the planning and forecasting aspect of your process. How much of it is incorporating the operational plan, your financial budget? Are you using periodic rolling forecasts? Are they driver-based? Is it being spilled over from the modeling, from the beginning of the process into your execution? Do you really understand the drivers of your business? I have found working with different clients that that's not the case. It's not the case because they're not collaborating. It's pretty much a push-out strategy versus a pull. And when it comes to the execution part, there isn't that evaluation, that other key pillar, that once you've been able to report on the information, are they evaluating and measuring their performance measures? Can you keep going through that slide, please? Because on the evaluation process, there are actions that you can take. Thank you. So when you're going through that evaluation process, there's a frequency that we suggest you need to incorporate. Maybe it's on a quarterly basis. Maybe it's on a 6-month basis. But the purpose of collaboration is to bring in the Office of Finance with the operational owner, with your forecast and planning analyst team to understand the drivers that you expected to achieve. And then through that, go through and make adjustments. So in this model, I'd like to share with you some best practice attributes, and we really categorize them in 4 buckets. So there's the process piece, and I'm going to talk about the benefits in a minute or two. So clearly, on that vision and strategy piece, there has to be a governance and oversight position. Now, that strategy piece wants to ensure there is that linkage to your initiative. Carrie talked about initiative planning. We agree. You have to link what your plan is back to strategy. You need to focus. So from that, right, make sure you get some formalized business plans. Now, as we go through this, there is also a key component of integrating a BI strategy, trying to get a single version of the truth. Now, forecasting methods, there are no surprises here. There's traditional top-down guidelines, right, and how you're going to distribute that forecast. And later I'm going to talk about a client example, how we created a hybrid process so that company could achieve both from the Office of Finance and from the business unit. So key to what we do is those key driver business models, so key performance indicators. From that governance and oversight, really understanding completely through the organization those common assumptions. If it's not understood, I don't know the level of achievement you'll have. And then lastly, we see some poor behavior with incentives. And I'll talk about this on a slide in 3 or 4 minutes. But working with our clients, once you're in a driver-based operating model, those owners of the information will bring and learn about process improvement. And it's those process improvements that you want to continuously live in and link it back to your strategic objectives. Let's move over to our first set of best practice attributes on the process side. So clearly, governance and oversight has to be present. I have worked with a client where they would come together and spend 50 to 75% of their time arguing over the information and the numbers because there was no clear understanding about the data definitions, roles, responsibilities, thresholds, materiality. So you really need to set the form from the beginning with the right oversight. Formalizing the business plan and then putting together how you're going to track those issues. And clearly, Excel for this client wasn't the way to track those results. Can we go to the next slide? Going to a best practice attribute of your forecasting method. So at this one client, we had a CFO who really didn't trust the owners, and he felt there was some sandbagging going on with the results. I think that's pretty common. We see that. And the owners of the business units really felt they were not accountable for the forecast, and therefore how much credence will they put to that if they're not accountable or responsible? So we had a dilemma. The CFO didn't trust, and his neck was on the line to really convey to internal and external stakeholders, whether or not they were going to reach financial results. And so the CFO wouldn't budge. So what we got them to agree to was a hybrid. We said, okay, let's do bottoms up and a top-down approach, right? The CFO was very much top-down, used historical trends, and felt that he had a tolerance of, plus or minus 5% of achieving his forecast. And then we got the owners to really agree to a bottoms up and created a process going back to that corporate performance management model whereby they would have the right tools and drivers to report back. And so that was a reason to reach collaboration within that organization. Next slide, please. Seem to have a delay on this computer. Okay, thank you. Driver-based models. First, we believe more value is earned with driver-based models that support a continuous horizon versus a hard stop at the end of the year. Terry talked about how she sees her clients at December 31st take an exhale and say, wow, we made it to the finish line. You really haven't. What we think a key is to meet frequently with that oversight committee and really review and measure. your outcomes. Digest that information. Go validate it back to the strategy and goals of the objectives. Don't be afraid to make adjustments. Okay? This starts to create the dynamic that most companies want to achieve but don't have in place. It's okay to change your KPIs. If through the review process and measurement you say, you know what, I don't think that's the right KPI we should be measuring because here's what we're learning in the marketplace. I've said this at another client, you know, a rose is a rose and it smells great. But a stinker is always going to be a stinker. So recognize that, be objective, and adapt to your marketplace and change your drivers. You don't always get it perfect from the get-go. So moving on to the fourth attribute about benchmarking. So this is very, very common that we see inside of forecasts. The targets that are created inside of forecasts are being linked back to incentive compensation. And really, that's not the right approach, right? Targets don't equal forecasts. If you look at this slide here, right, as you look at the under target, okay, and you see that red bullseye, perfect for a budget, and we start to incentivize people, what happens? Well, once they reach their target in the forecast, your performance improvement stops. And so what we persuade companies to think about is to incent based on overall company actual targets. Incent based on living in a continuous process improvement. Because if you're the owners of the data inside your business unit, you really know you live and die by information. This one client was a healthcare client, and they had a hospital operations, and then they had a rehabilitation center. So what we learned from the hospital administrator is that she was maintaining separate worksheets to look at her drivers about number of beds, type of patient care, when was Medicare going to cut off, okay, and at what point in time did it make sense for that patient to then move to the rehabilitation center. But she wasn't speaking with the owner of the rehabilitation center because now he wasn't forecasting that revenue because the clients were coming from the hospital. And so they came together in their oversight committee and talked about results. Did they finally realize there was a process improvement opportunity of sharing of information? So we put up a picture there of Pavlov about conditioning. This is more about conditioning and education inside of a company. And so, you know, the annual budget process really supports this picture. It really wants you to stop there, and then your performance improvements will stop. But with a driver-based modeling situation, it'll continue. You'll have that horizon to look at. You can incent on the targets and actual results. So if we employ these best practice attributes, what can you expect for some benefits? Well, you're certainly going to improve some efficiency. With that, you should expect data quality to improve, information. And if I have better information, I should expect some better decision making, especially if I'm collaborating from the Office of Finance. Now, I'm going to be really happy because I have the potential to grow my business and be more profitable. Information is key, right, to having smart growth. And now, if I'm collaborating with the business as the Office of Finance, I'm really starting to earn that trusted business partner title, which would be key, right, to achieving the overall vision and strategy inside our corporate performance management model, because that's where we began. Next slide. Okay, so I have an operating model. I have some best practice attributes. I should expect certain benefits, but what about some of my outcomes? So we think effectiveness and reviewing of your forecast is very important. reviewing the environment and the baseline information, how much of your baseline information can be static based on the economy and the world we live in the last 2 or 3 years? Pretty much not too reliable. Lots have changed. So you should expect as an outcome to review that baseline. Also, install the thinking about measuring and tracking your forecast. Okay? That's the real outcome so that you can adapt and make changes throughout the organization. I left here the finance and the operation plan. I debated whether or not to make that number 1 because what I really want to convey to the audience today is the level of collaboration and to focus on what matters by working together. And that will just improve, hopefully, the communication of your guidelines and your plans. That's how it all began, right? With the vision and strategy, with the modeling, then moving to goals and objectives. Once you get to those goals and objectives, you should be able to communicate better. So I began by saying I wanted to leave 3 questions for the audience to go back to their organization and ask. And they were as follows. Relevance of your information. This is what it's all about. How long does that information stay useful for you? Inside an annual budget process, it has a shelf life of, depending on your marketplace. Could be a month, could be a week, could be 6 months. What about the information relevance with a driver-based forecasting process? Should have more relevance if you're collaborating and you're concluding on the right drivers. Also go back and say, are we really monitoring and measuring? How good are we at doing this? Just don't go through the motions and get through the operating model, but examine what was expected and did it happen, and if not, how do you make changes? So hopefully this information that we're providing you today helps you to evolve, helps you to bring more value back into that next budget planning process, and bring that question back to your organization about how can we evolve. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was fantastic information for us. And, of course, the content is king, so despite our technical difficulties, I think we're delivering some very valuable content to our audience here today. So we're going to go ahead and do another polling question before I give Simon's introduction here. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll here, and I'll give Simon's introduction, and then we'll pass it along to Simon. Simon Westbrook. Simon specializes in providing contract CFO services to early-stage technology companies. From May 2005 to May 2009, Mr. Westbrook served as Chief Financial Officer of Public Wires Incorporated, a Silicon Valley company specializing in wireless communication. And from 2004 to 2005, he was CFO of NanoAmp Solutions Incorporated, a memory IC company. Prior to joining NanoAmp, Mr. Westbrook was Chief Financial Officer at Sage Incorporated, a company specializing in flat panel display processor ICs. He's a chartered accountant and holds a master's degree in economics from Trinity College, Cambridge in the United Kingdom. Throughout his career, Mr. Westbrook has been involved in 3 initial public offerings, 2 secondary public offerings, multiple public and private M&A transactions, and numerous rounds of venture capital and angel financing. And with that, I will pass it along over to you, Simon. You can just click on your screen and you'll have slide control. Simon? Go ahead, Simon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting here. It's great to hear our previous speakers telling us all the tools we should use and the methods we should do. But when it comes down to it, the person that has to do the work or is responsible for it is you or me, the CFO. And it can be a lot of work. If you'd like to go on to the first slide, please. Most people, when you mention the words budgets or forecasts to them, have a kind of an unhappy feeling that there's a lot of work ahead, there's a lot of problems. But I think it's important that we sell the concept of planning and budgeting as an opportunity to our colleagues across the company, whether we work for a small business where it's the owners, or whether we work for an international organization with multiple functional departments and operations in many countries with different cultures and different attitudes to budgets. I think it still makes our life easier if we can present this as an opportunity. And in fact, it's become something of a social occasion on a number of times when we've been going through the budget process with an international organization. It gives you a chance to either visit these companies or talk to them again and perhaps spend time that you wouldn't otherwise do to understand the local problems they have, both in anticipating budget issues and living within the constraints that are peculiar to their markets, as well as how they see the corporate world and the various market trends, competitive factors, and so on. And so by involving them and helping them to understand why we're doing this, you're giving them a much greater say in the planning process. They feel they're participating, and they're much more likely to be constructive in contributing to the budget process, as opposed to merely flowing a whole bunch of numbers into boxes in whatever your budget system is, whether it's good old Excel or whether it's something more sophisticated. So I think one of the key things here is to ensure that people want to do it. This may sound a hard sell, but I think if they understand what the process is and see it as a benefit to the business at large and not just a financial function, then you can be persuasive in this area. And I think to do this, it was mentioned earlier on, but this corporate vision is really an important part of it. You can invite people to participate, but you've got to be careful that their participation doesn't bring in wild, crazy, inconsistent, and impossible data. They need to know what the global picture is, and the guidance you give them will obviously depend on what the board's strategy is for the company, on what resources we have available to us financially and potential for investor support or other financial support if the plans require funding in the event of substantial growth. And so all this is a necessary part of providing the framework up front. It creates a lot of frustration to the various contributors to your corporate plan if they're given the opportunity to participate in a widest possible sense, and then elements of their submissions are rejected because they don't fit with corporate policy. Can you do the next slide, please? So the tools we use, I have to say I'm still an Excel fan. Won't make me popular with everybody, but of course the world is changing. But whatever the tools are, I think the key thing here is responsibility. We have to make sure that every person in this budgeting process, and it's typically not just the financial people, it should involve the engineering departments, the sales departments, and the marketing departments, the entire company, both as a way of ensuring that the plans and intents are coordinated, and to make sure that there is nobody who feels left out and becomes obstructive later on in terms of attempts to achieve the budget. As we delegate this responsibility to these individuals, we then set ourselves up for a consolidation and management process, which again is important to manage. And if you can move on to the next slide, I think one of the key things to successful budgeting is the timing of this thing. It's no good starting this process on December the 21st and hoping to have something ready January 1st. There has to be a planned organization where we allow enough time for individuals to think what they're doing, to provide the research and contribute their ideas. And there will need to be a number of iterations. Whether you're working, my view is we should start out with a top-down just so that we get this consistent view of the business. But the individual operating managers providing bottoms-up When we see whether the top and the bottom meets, if they don't, we're going to have to go back with guidance as to what's going to change. So there's always a need for multiple scenarios. Sometimes this could just be 2 or 3. Sometimes it can run into the tens or more. And I do recommend in this process that we document the various changes. Again, I'm thinking Excel as opposed to the fancy systems that may do this. But I think it's important that we're able to look back and understand why we ended up with this budget and the process we went through and the various issues that we considered when we changed these. And of course, one of the things that always seems to come up, you work your way through a series of maybe 20 budgets, and then somebody wants to go back to number 13 or whatever the earlier version was, and it's always helpful to know what you've changed since then. Next slide, please. So one of the important things that we really need is this buy-in commitment from the operating managers. There's this conflict between the accounting personality being well suited to the discipline of budgeting and producing the numbers, but at the same time the data is the responsibility of the operating manager. And so it is very important that the operating management has every opportunity to provide their input, to answer the challenges that are raised there, and ultimately they're putting their name to this data and will be responsible for the achievement of these budget numbers. And if these guys want to add more, if they want to contribute more than the corporate guidance, again, I'd like to give them the opportunity so they can see nothing was left out. If they offer ideas which in fact don't seem to work for the company, again, we're going to have to explain that. But giving them the opportunity, I think, is an important way of encouraging this commitment and understanding what the budget process is about. Next slide. One of the things that never surprises me about budgets is that I've never yet seen a sales budget that has been surpassed. They always seem to fall short. And I think one of the arts to budget management is understanding the people. Over a period of time, you will know the tendencies of individual operations management to underestimate, overestimate, and the history they've had on performance against the budget. And this, I'm not saying we should disbelieve them, but it does give you the ability to challenge much more seriously numbers they put up each year and to try and improve the quality and the trend. Against that, we have some individuals who like to sandbag the situation so that they can achieve their budget. I think the tendency of sandbaggers versus the underachievers depends on how the bonuses are paid out in the company. But I like to be skeptical about this too. And again, a track record of achievers and variances will help you to evaluate the quality of the information that is presented. Let's move on to the next slide. One of the issues that continues to strike me is that if we're falling short of a budget or we have significant variances either way on a budget, one of two things is happening. Either the budget was wrong or our performance is not up to what it should be. And of course the concept of updating, of rolling your forecasts is always a good thing, because it means that you're more likely to achieve what you thought you were going to achieve in the short term. However, when this happens, you tend to lose track of what the longer term objectives was. This is the analogy of moving the goalposts during the game. Everybody's heading towards one direction, and suddenly the goalposts move and you've got to go in another direction. And I think there is a balance here between holding people accountable to the original commitments they made to the grand budget and having sensible, realistic expectations of information for the next period and, in fact, for the rest of the period and the budget period. So the question is, how frequently do you move from a role and readopt this as a new budget beginning from whatever then day one is with new goalposts? My preference here is still the annual cycle. I don't believe that people are familiar enough to start trying to account for a 9-month period or a 13-month period to get us back onto the old cycle. I think our strategic budgeting and planning should still be based on the annual cycle, because that's how we're judged by the world at large. And so the accountability still has to be to those numbers, even though from a rolling forecast point of view, we may change these numbers and thereby the short-term expectations. And I guess one of the things we should do up front when setting the budget is to try and establish what kind of variances are acceptable and the norm under the trading environment that we're kind of building our budget in, and so that we sort of have an automatic highlight when we're beginning to have a problem, and that addresses this question of whether to roll or reforecast. Finally, typically when this whole budget process is done, if we move on to the next slide, we end up presenting the budget to the board. And I just have a few things I've learned by experience in presenting it to the boards. Generally speaking, they're not interested in this wealth of detail. We may have filled a computer or cut down several trees worth of paper in gathering the data from the various corners of the world and the various functions and the various scenarios. But essentially, their interest is at the top level. They just rely on us to have the detailed support to support that. So if you want your board to be interested and committed and make a decision, we have to have top-level summary data. And numbers in themselves are not enough. We have to put some flesh behind this data, some narratives, so that they can understand what the business issues are, the strengths and the weaknesses, the objectives, and the major changes that we are seeing as we present the summary data. Now, if you're in a board meeting when you present the budget and you have one of these sessions where they update the general commercial operations of the company, and you happen to have a salesperson there or an engineer there who is reporting on their function areas, you want to make sure they don't come out with some sort of announcement of new product ideas that have not been built into the budget, or that the engineers don't come out with an announcement of some new research and processes they're working on that will potentially undermine the budget again. This consistency factor is really important, not just in planning the initial forecast process, but also in the corporate approach to the board when we're presenting this budget. One of the things I think can help, boards are naturally skeptical. As I mentioned before, management have a bad track record of either going over or under budgets. It does make them feel comfortable if they can validate the data and assumptions in our forecast with some sort of feedback into external data and support. For example, if we can produce market growth statistics and provide them with some information on this, if we can provide them with some competitive data from other companies in our field, or just general economic data that relates and supports the trends in our budget, it can make them feel that we are in line with the expectations and not having to justify unique factors within our own business. And then the final issue, which I always like to think of, is we're presenting a budget. Do our systems allow us to measure against that budget? And how are we going to come back in X months from now to present to the board if we have big variances on that budget? And I think it's important in terms of our confidence factor in presenting these budgets that we know we can measure the data and be able to explain these variances. Obviously, failure to achieve a budget will always be a problem, but as long as we understand the reasons why, they're not going to shoot the messenger, and if we know the reasons why, the chances are we may be able to do something to fix it. So that's a quick and hurried summary of some of the real-life issues that I have considered as I've been involved in the budgeting process over a wide range of companies, and I'd be happy to deal with any questions or comments once Ernie takes the webinar back to him. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, Simon. We're going to go ahead and take a few quick questions. We got started a few minutes late, so I'd like to go ahead and take a few quick questions and be mindful of your time. The good news is that I'm sure all of our panelists would be happy to take questions from you offline. So if you have any questions and we don't get to those questions here today, please send us an email and we will get your questions unanswered for you. Just want to remind you, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those questions into the questions area of your box, and we will go ahead and take a few questions here. Simon, the first question is for you. It says, will you elaborate on the accountability relative to the annual budget submitted to the board versus the idea of rolling budgets and or changes to the budgets during the year?
I didn't quite get, was the question how I decide whether we're going to roll or make a fundamental change in the budget? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Yeah, so I think the question, rolls around, you were mentioning how you stay on that annual budget permitted to the board and maintain that level of accountability to the annual budget, despite the fact that those numbers might be rolling during the year, based on
right. No, I think that right. I think let me actually go back to another issue. I think when we produce the official budget, the budget that management adopts within the company, there is always room for sort of multiple budgets based on that. For example, if the sales guys give you a sales budget of 10 million, and we mark that down to 9 million, we may in fact provide a further discount factor in adapting the budget we present to the board, if conservatism is really important. So it's like keeping 2 or 3 sets of books. It can get very complicated, but it can build in some tiers of buffer that may protect expectations of performance against the commitments to the performance. But this question of the annual budget, I find that most boards kind of old-fashioned in that if you commit to do something, they expect you to do it. If the circumstances change, they expect you to come up with plans that can deal with those changed circumstances. And so no matter that we may present a rolling budget or attempt to present a rolling budget, I still think there is a question always comes up, well, what did we originally commit to here? So I'm sorry to say, I think that a budget is a budget is a budget. There is an annual cycle. There is a general expectation measured against it. But commercially, there is obviously an understanding and awareness that we need to be realistic in respect of the forecast for the rest of the year, for the rest of next year, etc., and that there should be some provision for a rolling forecast that can provide that information.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. I'll get a question to Carrie, then I'll direct one to Joe. Carrie, you can start off. What are some of the technologies being used in budgeting and forecasting other than Excel for a middle market company?
Well, full explanation. I work for a cloud, for a software as a service budgeting and planning provider. So the majority of our customers are between, say, 25 million and $1 billion, and the majority of those in the middle. So the mid-market, I would say, is clearly looking to the cloud to provide it with an alternative to spreadsheets and an alternative to the heavy lifting on-premise applications that have been around for a long time. So me personally, it's cloud is where it's at for the mid-market.
Carrie, can you comment as to kind of some of the reasons that the cloud technology is more accessible to the middle market companies? I think some of our folks, may think that technology is not really accessible to them on the cost side.
Sure. Well, first of all, the on-premise applications, whilst functionally rich, have a very heavy IT and finance administration, but primarily IT burden. So if you think of the fact that these new web applications require multiple servers, both to install, buy, install, and maintain. The applications have multiple databases to install, buy, and maintain. There's a heavy lifting, implementation, installation, and then ongoing maintenance costs with on-premise. None of that needs to be done. All of the software, all of the hardware needs is managed by the software as a service provider. And then the other thing is that the costs are an ongoing subscription cost. So there's no, it's an ongoing per user cost. So it's a very predictable cost model, right? You know how much you're going to spend. And, the aspiration for many mid-market companies is to become an upper-market company, right? So it's easy to buy and use an application with the size of company you are now, and then to have the application grow with you as your business grows, which makes better economic sense, in my opinion.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. I think we'll close out the Q&A. I'd like to direct a question to Joe. Joe, with what you are seeing from your clients, could you just give us a few of the most common mistakes that you see with their clients? So if someone is getting ready to go through that process review, maybe the top 3 things that you see that can really drive success in improving the process.
Sure, I'd be glad to. The first critical error is collaboration. And it's really not at an effective point where I think the Office of Finance is really working with their internal customers. I see varying degrees to it. Others are better at it, but there's not a level of sophistication with them in terms of coming together to review results. I also see, because of this lack of collaboration, I see that the internal owners of the information are going off and doing things on their own to run their business, and thus causing silos of information, and therefore creating more risk to the organization without having a governance structure in place. And I would say the third point, Ernie, would be, we'll have all this information, but the access to the information and the relevance to the information is still not quite understood. And I think that starts with the process, where the organization is really not embracing or understanding, the common assumptions and the drivers. Those are the 3 that I would see at my clients. And, they're not industry specific either. Worked with, financial services firm, healthcare, consumer product companies, manufacturing companies, so that there seems to be a pattern there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. With that question, what I'd like to do is go ahead and close out the Q&A session. As I mentioned before, if you have your questions, please go ahead and type your questions in, and we'll do our best to get those questions answered on Proformative. We are also are very happy to connect you with any of our speakers here this morning. So again, we'd like to thank Carrie Brooke, Joe Ritchie, and Simon Westbrook for their time and insight. Again, if you'd like to connect with any of them, please let us know, and there will be a spot on the survey we'll send you after the event. These folks are leaders in their field and are an excellent resource of information on today's topic. Again, thanks to today's sponsors, Host Analytics and Baker Tilly. Appreciate their commitment to thought leadership. You will see on the screen your CPE questions and credits to Tanya Walsh, and Tanya Walsh will be sending you a survey later today, and also a link to the slides, so those will be made available. And last but not least, I would like to thank the audience for your time and your patience with our technical difficulties today. As a former longtime financial professional, I know content is king, and I'm confident that we have delivered some great content for our attendees today. So with that, I'd like to wish you all have a great day, and we hope to see you on Proformative. Thank you very much.